Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
Today, we're going to be talking about automatic attack disruption, which is one of the newer features within Microsoft's security stack. We have talked about this before, but there's something new that has been added in. We now have OAuth protection built into automatic attack disruption. So throughout the show, we're going to talk about OAuth and kind of go back over what automatic attack disruption is. But over the past couple years, there's been a significant increase in nation-state attackers and just cybersecurity attackers leveraging OAuth as an attack vector. And so now the Defender XDR platform uses the automatic attack disruption with these signals to mitigate OAuth activities that might be suspicious. So what is OAuth in general? If you're not familiar, brand new to security, or you first listening in here using this term, you're like, what is OAuth? It's essentially a common standard used to access applications and services without revealing the password. So this is probably something that most people have encountered in their daily lives. You might go into a website and you might see the sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook, sign in with Apple. And oftentimes there's a sign in with Microsoft. And what happens a lot is a user at a company might inadvertently or on purpose use their corporate Entra ID to sign into Microsoft instead of an MSA like a Outlook.com email address. And so when you do that, the employees might not think about it, because when you do that, it usually pops up something. And by default, if a security administrator has not gone in to restrict what applications can be approved or what permissions can be approved, by default, it's wide open, actually. And so a user can consent, and oftentimes there's applications, even if you did go in and restrict it, there may be historical applications that are still there with permissions. And so it pops up a sign that says, here are the permissions that you want to grant to the application, and the user will just hit OK, because that's what users do. They're not going to look through the list and hit no. They're trying to do something probably business related. Maybe, like, for example, it's a marketing department that wants to send out mass emails. So they get some, like a platform to do like surveys, like SurveyMonkey or something like that. And then they want to send out, and you have to authenticate using this OAuth for permissions for SurveyMonkey to send out the emails on behalf of SurveyMonkey, right? And so the user's trying to do something for work. They need to send out these surveys. And so they get this tool and they just hit, okay, of course I need to approve this tool to do the emails. But maybe the tool itself says, oh, not only can I send emails, but I can also read all of your emails, and then I can like add users and so on and so forth. So there's all these different permissions, and all the permissions are listed within the Microsoft Graph permissions reference, which I'll list in the show notes. There's a ton of them, and they may not know that some of these are probably overprivileged. So first things first, you should always check to see if you have restricted this. The recommendation is to at least restrict it somewhat, not leave it out in the open. There's a couple different options, which we've talked about before. You can do consent for all apps. You can do user consents from verified publishers or selected permissions. So you can do selected permissions that you think are low, which is also a good idea, or you can just block it all and have an admin approve each one of them, which can be process burdening, but that could be an option as well. So first check that, be familiar with the permissions in the graph reference, and then understand that overprivileged apps can be a risk for your company. Like, our internal research shows that 1 in 3 OAuth applications are overprivileged. And so, common tactic is an attacker will use like a phishing source to compromise user count and then create a malicious OAuth application with elevated privileges. Or they could hijack an existing OAuth app and manipulate it for malicious use. And so once they're in with these permissions, then they can do certain things, because if I have access to create an app, I could, there's APIs and permissions in the graph reference for things like creating a new VM. I can create a VM to do some Bitcoin mining or something like that, or host malware or something. So there's permissions and APIs that you don't want OAuth apps to do. And in fact, I think we had an overprivileged OAuth app in one of the attacks from Microsoft a while back. And so these things, they can hit any company. So that's what we're talking about here, and trying to protect that in general.
Just a reminder, Andy and I both work for Microsoft in our field security sales. We do the show outside of work on our own time and with our own money. So we're just talking about stuff we know, as we often do on the show, but not under editorial control or guidance from our employer. But of course, love to keep our employer in our good graces. That said, Andy, good overview on OAuth apps, what they are. You touched on some of the settings in Entra ID that you can configure. Guidance is to configure that to the admin only setting, recognizing that that does create administrative burden, but is for sure the most secure option. One call out is in Defender for Cloud Apps. If you're licensed for that, there is an entire app governance model in there that can go through your OAuth apps, talk about the prevalence of them, talk about the sensitivity of the permissions they've requested, can even highlight known malicious applications that are there as well. So certainly something to use if you're concerned about OAuth apps is look at those Defender for Cloud Apps options and do that review of them. Let's see, anything else to touch on? I would imagine that default may change in the future. Aligned with Microsoft's Secure Future initiative, where having defaults be secure by default is a goal for Microsoft moving forward. You will see some continued shift in defaults over time as we move them to be secure out of the box. And so I would imagine that's something that will change with time with that Entra ID setting. In fact, that may have already been announced. When you were talking about that, Andy, and the default, I was thinking, I thought that changed, but sometimes it's hard to keep track of, to be honest. But I would imagine you will see it change in the future if it hasn't already.
Yeah, my guess is, based on the way that things have been moving, we probably will change it to the verified publishers.
At a minimum, yeah. If that hasn't happened already, that sounds like where it was going. I think it was at least going to move to verified publishers by default.
Yep. Okay, so in Microsoft's automatic attack disruption capabilities, this is something that was announced a little while back, and now we're expanding on some of those capabilities with this OAuth protection. But it's essentially a way that we can disrupt in-progress attacks and prevent them from spreading. And what it does is it analyzes things that are happening within your environment in the Defender XDR, including signals from devices, identities, applications, Azure activity. I mean, everything that feeds into Defender XDR. And we're going to correlate these based on some models that we've done using AI, machine learning language, as well as real world threat intelligence. And if we can say with 99% confidence that this is an attack that we think is happening right now and that we know what is going to happen next, then we will block that attack from continuing. Now, the question comes up a lot of, why do we have to wait for things to happen, right? Why can't we just proactively stop it? If we see something like this happen, why can't we just block it right off the bat? And there are some tools within the stack that can do that. But this is kind of the next step where we're very, very sure, 99% confidence. We have to have that signal, because like some of these things, disabling a user, containing a device, can be disruptive for a business if it were just to happen with lower confidence. And so we do have to get all these signals to be exactly, very, very sure that this is the type of attack that's happening. It fits this model. It fits this threat intelligence. These are the signs we're seeing before we actually automatically take action on it. So
that's a really good point, Andy. And just to unpack that a little bit further, I would say we as a security industry have put all our eggs in the basket of protection for a very long time, where we've been so over-rotated on protection that we have not done as much work on detection and response as we should have. And as a result of that, when things do slip through the protection layer, we aren't as strong on what to do next. If we're relying on ad hoc human response that is human generated every time at human speed and with the limitations of human intelligence, that's a losing battle over time. And the thing is, attackers are smart. They may learn, I can consistently get past this protection if I do this. But here's where we're talking about XDR, and this is where XDR is not just a marketing term. In Microsoft language, XDR means more than just the endpoint. It means extended is how everyone else uses it, but that can just sound like extreme, extended, cool. Microsoft literally means no, this is signal from the endpoint, from the cloud identity, from the on-premises identity, from the collaboration security solution, from the SaaS security solution, from the cloud security posture management solution, from insider risk management, from data loss prevention. All of those signals flow into Defender XDR. And where Microsoft's Big Mac sauce, the secret sauce, if you will, is in that incident correlation engine, where we're taking all of those disparate alerts from those different solutions and we're stitching them together in a timeline in order with all of those different security domains in a single view. It's the mythical single pane of glass, except we've been doing it now for half a decade. And honestly, when we get so hung up in like, well, we're doing a CrowdStrike compete, so let's look at Defender for Endpoint, or we're doing a Proofpoint compete, so let's look at Defender for Office, we're missing the bigger picture, and that's Defender XDR. And that's what this is a capability of, this automated attack disruption. Is when we're able to create those instances with very high confidence and predict the next steps with very high confidence, with high fidelity signal, and with 99% confidence we can disrupt the attack, then we're going to do it. And we're going to have that on by default. That's what this is. And sometimes you don't get to the point of it being high fidelity when all these things are viewed in a vacuum. This is why we fundamentally believe that a multi-vendor approach cannot be as successful as a platform approach, because I may have one identity incident that by itself, identity alert, doesn't look like that big of a deal. Or I may have a SaaS security incident alert, that doesn't look like that big of a deal. But when I put them on a timeline and I'm able to stitch them together across the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and I can see the different stages progressing from initial access and reconnaissance to lateral movement, now I know with confidence something is happening and let's stop it. And that only happens when you have all of those disparate alerts brought together and correlated. And if you can't do that, or if you're relying on your SIM to do it with some sort of static analysis or static rule sets, then you're missing that. And that's what we so fundamentally believe is this is the only way to really do this at scale effectively. And it lights up capabilities like automated attack disruption.
Yeah. And just to kind of touch on automatic attack disruption from the beginning, if you're not familiar, we did do a little bit of a show on this as well, but it has a few actions that it can take automatically. Contain the device, which uses MDE, Defender for Endpoint, to do that. So if there is something that's malicious on the device itself, and we know with high confidence that it could laterally move, we can cut that off and automatically contain that device without any administrative action. You can also disable the user. So this uses Defender for Identity to do that. And you do have to have that action identity within Defender Identity configured, which uses a GMSA to do that. But when you do that, if we have an identity, so MDI is on premise, so that, for Active Directory, and of course, like it can work with Entra as well to disable that. So it all depends on how the disable identity works differently depending on the identity that's involved and how it's being scoped. But either way, we have the ability to disable the identity for on-prem or in the cloud automatically without any administrative actions. So if we detect that with 99% confidence or higher that the identity is compromised, we'll disable the identity. Now, the problem is with just disabling the identity is this stuff takes time in the modern identity world. Active Directory, you disable an identity on-prem, it takes time to replicate that change to the domain controllers. If you sync that identity with Entra, AD sync takes time unless you kick off a manual dir sync, right? So these things take time in order to replicate. And then, oh, by the way, if it's a cloud resource, you have tokens that are involved. And so those tokens have lifetimes to them, whereas your session token is at least an hour, right? And so that short-lived token, depending on where it was issued and what time frame the identity was disabled, like we'll still have a lifetime for the attacker to do damage to whatever resource they already have access to. And so this is where this automatic attack disruption shines. There's another action that it can take called contain user. And so what it does is it uses the MDE, the Defender for Endpoint agent, to contain the user automatically, where it'll block any lateral movement or remote encryption related to incoming communications with Defender for Endpoint onboarded devices. And so if you already have a connection to something, it can cut that off. So say you are using RDP to a server, or your SSH to a resource, or you have access to an application that you have authenticated to. We can communicate between the MDE onboarded devices and say, oh, this user is compromised. Because we have those signals with XDR, it moves a lot faster than these traditional sync methods of identity. And we can automatically revoke access to resources and applications that have already been authenticated to. And so that's really important because it travels a lot faster, and you can cut off access to those resources right away.
The usual response time for automated attack disruption is under 3 minutes. To give you a timeline on that, as Andy was comparing to traditional user disablement, which can, depending on your DIR sync interval and everything else, access token expiration can be up to an hour in many cases, if not longer. So to summarize, Andy, what we've talked about so far, we've talked about automated attack disruption, which we've done on a previous show. And we covered the ability to disable identities, to contain endpoints, and now you just covered containing identities. And so now we're going to pivot to talking about the new capability, which has to do with OAuth. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So an attack example for this new OAuth capability is, let's say for initial access, if we're using the MITRE framework here, initial access, user gets an email that looks legitimate, but contains a phishing link that redirects them to an adversary in the middle phishing kit. Through that, the next step in the MITRE attack framework is credential access. And so the user clicks on that link, they're redirected to the proxy impersonation page, and they fill in their credentials, and the attacker steals the credentials and the access token, which gives them the ability to create or modify OAuth applications. In persistence and defense evasion, the attacker is going to create multiple malicious OAuth apps across the various tenants with read-write capabilities to the user's emails, files, other resources. And then the attacker creates an inbox forwarding rule to exfiltrate emails. The additional rule created to empty out the sent box and then deleting any of the evidence that the user was compromised. So most organizations are fairly blind when it comes to this type of attack. So we'll come in with automatic attack disruption. Defender XDR is going to gain insights from all of these different sources: endpoints, identities, email, collaboration tools, SaaS applications, and they correlate it into this one single high confidence incident. And it's going to take automatic action to disable the identity and contain that user that created that highly malicious OAuth application.
Now, before you go any further, let's unpack why organizations are so blind to this. So the initial email could have been a zero-day website, a bespoke website that maybe was stood up with Evil Jinx or one of its cousins that's never been seen before, zero-day threat. And the user clicked on it, and the attacker stole their access token. They intercepted it, attacker in the middle, took that access token, replayed it. So we have no sign-in logs from unusual sign-ins or anything like that, because we're using the existing sign-in. We're just stealing the access token. And most organizations, up until recently, have not had really a good ability to detect token replay as well. So we're going to replay the token. Then we're going to go quietly create a couple of OAuth apps to gain that persistence, which we have poor visibility into and poor understanding to. And then we're going to set up email forwarding rules, which, by the way, organizations also tend to be blind to. At no point have we signed in as the user, done anything to give any hint that anything's wrong. The user went through a normal sign-in. It worked as normal. It was their organization's legit sign-in page, just passing through a proxy. So it's not like they got redirected to some sketchy-looking phishing site that was FedEx spelled wrong and told them they had a package or anything weird like that. It was none of this really raises anybody's attention. And again, talking about like why putting all the alerts together and correlating them helps, think of any one of these alerts. No software ran on the endpoint. We clicked a link to a one-time, perhaps even bespoke 0-day website that's never been flagged as malicious. We see no anomalous sign-ins. We don't really see any anomalous behavior or anything because all of this is relatively under the radar. Creating new email rules is not terribly unusual. Consenting to OAuth apps in most organizations is undermanaged and also does not raise attention. All of this by itself is not that big of a deal. And so if you're looking at all of these in a vacuum and you see the click and proof point and it doesn't get your attention from email perspective, and you see in Netscope that they visited this website, it doesn't get your attention, and you don't have any alerting on some of these other things, like you begin to understand why like none of this bubbles up to be attention worthy. But when you put it all together and you say, they clicked a 0-day, and we see token theft, and we see this, and we see that, and you put that all together, all of a sudden you're like, holy smokes, there's something going on here, and I'm really confident about it. But you have to have that visibility across domains to do that. And unless you are a SIM warlord to build, the most incredible analytics rules in your SIM to stitch this together, you're not catching this any other way other than having something that can correlate all those together.
Yeah, and I always tell organizations that I talk to about this is that automatic attack disruption is at its core an identity protection. Obviously, like it uses MDE as well for device contained, but at its core, it's a huge identity protection solution because it's looking at the identity, compromised identities, helping you disable the users as well as contain that lateral movement with contain user ability. And so that's really, we're gaining insight on the malicious OAuth creations and signals here. And based on those types of signals, now we're going to disable the compromised user that created that OAuth app, and then you can remediate that later. Now, there is some integration required for this OAuth feature, which is there, Adam, you had mentioned previously that Defender for Cloud Apps has that OAuth permissions analyzer, that's posture management, app governance within there. You do have to have that integration turned on for XDR in order to monitor for malicious OAuth applications. And if you wanted to go and revoke that OAuth permission, that's also done within Defender for Cloud Apps. So you have to go into Defender for Cloud Apps, look at the application, revoke the permissions, and also revoke the application. And you can also have different policies built into Defender for Cloud Apps to do that automatically if a threshold is exceeded in the risk of the application to just revoke it automatically. And so that's part of it. So if we get into some of the licensing requirements, like how do I get this? How do I turn it on? Adam, you mentioned that it is turned on by default. Really, any one of the Defender things that if you have a license for one of the Defender things, it's part of automatic attack disruption already. But the more that you have and the more that you deploy, the better the solution's going to be, right? Like at a minimum, you have to have at least one of the Defender stacks, like Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Endpoint. But if you have a combination of licensing like EMS E5 or E5 security or the full E5 stack, obviously that's going to be better. And then the more that you deploy from those, and we're going to do a show on this shortly in the future, but a lot of our stuff even works in passive mode and you can deploy it side by side with third-party things. And so, stay listening for that show because I think that would be very valuable for a lot of people because we understand that not everybody is a one Microsoft shop. Even Microsoft's not a one Microsoft shop,
Right?
Like we use obviously all of our tools, but we have third-party tools as well. And so, a lot of
we're not
stuff,
even the first to adopt our tools in some cases because, at the scale of Microsoft, 220,000 employees and contractors, like it has to be enterprise ready to be ready to go. And our CISOs, past and present, have said, hey, our job is to protect Microsoft, not to be the first and best customer for our engineering teams. Now, obviously, we're going to use our tools whenever and wherever it makes sense and when they're ready, but we have a mandate to protect the company, not just be a showcase customer. And so, yeah, we're not 100% homogenous Microsoft, and nobody is. And to Andy's point, and I look forward to doing that show, Andy, there are ways to get some of this telemetry and information, even if it's not your primary tool, running Defender for Endpoint in passive mode. running Defender for Office as a second set of eyes, as two examples of tools where you can capture that telemetry and that information, even if you're still relying on another solution today. And that can help get these signals into the XDR platform and enable these kind of use cases.
So as far as configuration goes, now it is turned on by default, but if you wanted to go and configure the level of automatic attack disruption that's available for your devices and users, you can do that. And so if you go under endpoints and permissions and device groups, you can review your device group policies, and there's a remediation level column. Microsoft recommends using full remediation. And so that's what it defaults to. And if you do full remediation, Defender for Endpoint will automatically investigate and remediate devices without any human intervention. There's several semi-approval ones that are there. And then there's also a no automation. So if you do no automation, you're going to turn off automatic attack disruption for those devices. And there may be a reason that you want to do that for certain device groups. So again, these are done by device groups. The identities, there's no configuration for. If we sense an identity that is going to be that is compromised 99%, we're going to disable the identity and you can go on from there. But disabling devices can be impactful, and so you can choose that level of automation here. Now the semi ones, you can do semi approval for all folders, which means that you do have to approve the remediation action, or you can do semi approval for non-temporary folders, or you can do semi approval for system folders. And so there's a couple levels that you can do for that, for those device automation levels. And you can pick and choose. And so you also need to configure some other things. And again, we're going to link the documentation for configuring this in the show notes, but you do have to configure device discovery to at least standard mode on your device MDE settings. MDI auditing on domain controllers needs to be turned on. I mentioned the MDI action account. You got to have a GMSA scoped for that action account in order to disable identities on-prem, and that Defender for Cloud Apps connector needs to be turned on for the OAuth portion of this. So some things that you do need to do, a lot of this stuff, most customers who are using XDR probably already have configured. So if this stuff is stuff that you've already done, it's turned on automatically and you're like good to go, then there's nothing else. But there's some granular controls that you can do for the device groups. But overall, I think this is, it was a game changer back then. It's still a game changer now. This is something that's very unique to Microsoft. Like there's really no other company out there. And this is not just like me talking as a Microsoft employee, but as a security professional, this is game changing. There's really nothing else on the market in a suite that has this type of capability with this type of level of visibility and access to do this type of defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do market it that way too. I have just had the opportunity to review a lot of our marketing material slides, and they certainly lean heavily on this because the belief is it's very differentiated. It is unique capability in the Microsoft stack today. And it's by virtue of the approach that Microsoft uses with the platform, as opposed to in kind of doing the multi-vendor or individual workload solutions. It's building them together. And that's the difference maker here. So, certainly take as much advantage of this as you can. Understand if you're using other solutions, you may not be able to take advantage of all of it. But this is one of those things that's really high upside and very little downside. And yes, as Microsoft continues down this Secure Future Initiative path, we are going to see more programs and software from Microsoft ship in its most secured state by default, secure out of the box, and you will see more of this. We mentioned it with the Intra ID settings could potentially change, but this is not the last you will hear where Microsoft will say this is on by default in its most strict and secure setting. And that's because that is our North Star for how we're going to build software and services moving forward, is they will be secure by default, secure by design, with secure operations built in. And that's, we talk about the tyranny of the default all the time on this show, and you will see that shift. So the days of having to quote unquote unbox something, like software doesn't come in boxes today, but having to spend a whole bunch of time hardening it and getting it to that state, the goal is in the future, you don't have to do that, because out of the box, it's in its most hardened and secure state. Obviously, some of those are aspirational goals more than maybe realistic goals in some cases, but you will see that shift with Microsoft over time. And this is a great example of that, where we're confident This is not going to give you false positives. This is not going to take undesirable actions. This is only going to kick in when you really want it to kick in, and stop those actions within 3 minutes of detection in almost all cases with 99% confidence. And that's just something at human scope and scale we cannot solve for. And you talked about, Andy, in one of the two major security incidents Microsoft had in 2023, one was at the hands of the Chinese, one was at the hands of the Russians, and I forget which one was which. I believe this was the Russian attack that leveraged the OAuth applications to kind of evade detection. We literally took those learnings from that incident and built them into the product. So today we would have automatic attack disruption against the attack technique that they used that was so novel and so flew under the radar that it was able to breach some of our defenses, not all of them, because the defense in depth and layered approach really did work and prevent a larger blast radius from that incident. But now taking what we learned from that and making it so all customers are protected from that attack by default, that's why I love being a cybersecurity professional. And it's why I talk about like the rising tide lifting all ships and those sorts of, cybersecurity is a team sport, all of those things. It's because I do believe that, like, when we can take bad things that happen and disappointing things that happen, but we can learn from them and we can all harden our defenses over time because of what we learned. That's really cool. And that's what I love about cybersecurity, is when we're able to get those wins and make these attackers have to work even harder to get something done. And they will, I have no doubt. But as we continue to harden our defenses and make their jobs harder, that's the fun part of this job, is stopping the bad guys.
All right, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening. As always, our contact information along with the links to what we talked about will be in the show notes. If you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future, please reach out. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.